So I wanted to start off by thanking the wonderful organizations who helped us let people know about this event. We work with them a lot, and we're really grateful for them helping, inviting their members. And I want to invite folks who are tuning in from those groups, and I hope you'll keep coming back to other FACTS events. It's wonderful to have you here. And we are a Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, but we welcome everyone. So people who have a faith community and those who don't identify that way. Okay, and has Bill joined us? I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Bill McKibben. And I am so excited to have him tonight, speaking with us tonight, because he's been one of my heroes for a very long time. I helped co-found 350 Loudoun, actually. And Bill and I actually connected through his childhood church, Hancock United Church of Christ, which is a wonderful historic church right on the green of Lexington, Massachusetts. And it just happens to be where my sister and her family currently worship. So it's so cool. We connected through a faith community. So Bill, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, what a great pleasure to be with you. It's cold and snowy here in the hills of Vermont tonight, but I'm inside and warm and very grateful to be getting to spend a few minutes with all of you. It's probably more fun for me than it will be for you, because I'm afraid that there's a part of my work in the world which is just to be a professional bummer outer of people. I wrote the very first book about climate change way back in 1989, and I've been working on the same suite of issues ever since. And I've got to say, it hasn't gotten easier or better. So I will just spend a few minutes on the trouble we're in, and then I will switch to what we're going to do about it and what we need everybody doing. Today, it got to 123 degrees Fahrenheit in a town in Australia, highest temperature ever recorded in the southern hemisphere of our planet. The things that we warned about when I was writing The End of Nature in 1989, the things that we warned about are all happening. It turns out that these scientists were entirely right about where we were headed and what was going to happen. And so 30 years later, having done very little to staunch the flow of carbon into the atmosphere, those warnings have become the headlines. And you all know it, and I'm not going to belabor any of it, except to say that we're seeing already enormous, enormous, enormous changes. So far, we've raised the temperature of the Earth about 1 degree Celsius, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't sound like a huge amount, but if you take it in other units, you get a sense of just how much it is. The extra heat that we trap every day because of the carbon we've put in the atmosphere is the heat equivalent of about 400,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. So once you think in terms like that, you begin to understand how we've melted most of the sea ice in the summer Arctic, how it is that we've managed to disrupt the flow of the jet stream so that now we have these extreme periods of drought or of rain, disrupted even the flow of the Gulf Stream, the great marine current 100 times the size of the Amazon River that brings warm water north from the equator. Its flow has dropped about 15% in the last decades as we've melted ice in the Arctic. These are extraordinary practical problems. If you wanted one statistic or one fact to understand the century we live in, you could do worse than warm air holds more water vapor than cold. Because of that, we see these extraordinary periods of drought in arid areas, California, say. And so we get wildfires on a scale that we've never seen before, that happen all year round. We had incredible wildfires in the Christmas holiday in Colorado. Uh, hundreds and hundreds of houses burned, not up in the mountains, down in the middle of suburbia. People fleeing Target and Costco because they were catching on fire from the embers blown in the door. Once that water vapor is evaporated up in the atmosphere, it comes down in short order. And so in the wet parts of the world, we see these huge increases in flood. We see floods like we haven't seen on this planet since Noah. I was in New York in August on the day that the remnants of Hurricane Ida drifted through and produced the greatest rainfall in 150 years of record keeping in New York City. It crushed the old record, which had been set 11 days earlier. It was terrifying, actually. Water gushing through the subway system like some kind of horror movie. People drowned, whole families drowned in basement apartments because they filled with water in the richest city in the world. And if that's happening in New York and California, rest assured it's happening far more dramatically in places where there are fewer cameras and in places that have done much less to cause the crisis we now face. The iron law of global warming, important for people of faith to bear in mind, is that the less you did to cause it, the sooner and the harder you get hit. This is the most unfair thing that we have ever done. From those of us who come from traditions whose most important admonition is to love one's neighbor, it is a command that we are not only failing to fulfill, but that we are flouting. We are drowning our neighbors, sickening our neighbors, making it impossible for them to grow food. This is the most unfair thing that's ever happened on our planet. And for people of faith too, it comes with a kind of implicit challenge to all of our sense of the world. I wrote a book once on the book of Job in the Hebrew Bible, which is my favorite text, maybe in the Bible, Old Testament or New. You, I'm sure, all know it. Job, a good man, finds himself cursed by God. Pretty soon he's living on a dung heap at the edge of town, covered with oozing sores. All his flocks have died. He is not happy about this. He spends 37 long chapters demanding that God come give an explanation for what happened to him. Be careful what you wish for. In the 38th chapter, God finally appears, this time speaking as a voice from the whirlwind. And he delivers, there's better theologians than me on this call, but I think God delivers the longest soliloquy that he delivers anywhere in the Bible. And it is it's an impassioned and beautiful description of the natural world. The first great piece of nature writing in the Western canon, biologically accurate, sexy, crunchy, extraordinarily beautiful tour of everything around us and of all the other creatures we share the world with, vultures, lions, on and on and on. But it's also the most sarcastic God ever gets. He's basically taunting Job the whole time. If you're so smart, if you know everything, if you want all these answers, you tell me, where do I keep the storms? Can you whistle up a blizzard? Can you tell the proud waves, here this far you shall break and no further? And Job, after about 2.5 chapters of this, Job basically says, sorry I asked, can I sit down now? And that's been the position that humans have always been in. We've been small compared to the big forces around us, however you describe those forces. But we started growing at some point. Really, most dramatically, I suppose, we began to grow in the middle of the last century with the explosions of the first atomic bombs. It was Oppenheimer who watched that explosion in the New Mexico desert and quoted from the Hindu scripture, from the Gita, saying, we are become as God's destroyers of worlds. But you know, the human imagination could take in the spectacle of those mushroom clouds and understand it at some visceral level that allowed us so far to avoid a repetition of that folly after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's been harder for us to understand, to viscerally get that the explosion of 1 billion pistons in 1 billion cylinders every second of every minute of every hour can accomplish the same kind of damage, but it turns out it can. The damage we're seeing now from climate change is like what would happen if we had a big nuclear war. And we haven't done anything to head it off. We haven't done anything, not because we don't know what to do, we do. We've now reached the point, thanks to great science and engineering, that solar power and wind power are the cheapest forms of electricity on planet Earth, and the batteries to store that energy are also coming down sharply in price. We are at the point when there's not a technological or economic obstacle to stopping the combustion of stuff on planet Earth, to stop burning coal and gas and oil, and instead rely on the fact that the good Lord hung a big burning ball of flame 93 million miles away in the sky, and we know how to make use of it. So if it's not a technological obstacle or an economic obstacle, what kind of obstacle is it? Well, it's the obstacle represented by inertia and even more by self-interest. The truth is that there is a small group of people with a vested interest in keeping us doing what we're doing. And they have been entirely successful for 30 years now. The fossil fuel industry, we now know from whistleblowers and inside reports, the fossil fuel industry 30 years ago knew all that there was to know about climate change. Exxon scientists told their management what the temperature was going to be in 2020, and they were spot on, and they were believed. Exxon started building all their drilling rigs higher to compensate for the rise in sea level they knew was on the way. But what Exxon did not do was tell any of the rest of us. Instead, they joined with everybody else across the industry to build this architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation. Any ethical system on Earth would have demanded at a bare minimum that when scientists like Jim Hansen testify before Congress that we were facing grave, grave problems, the CEOs of those oil companies would say, yeah, you know what, our scientists are telling us the same thing. And if they'd done that, we would have gotten to work. No one would have said, oh, Chevron's just being fear mongers or something. We would have done what we needed to do, but we didn't. Instead, we wasted 30 years locked in this completely sterile debate about whether or not global warming was real. A debate both sides knew the answer to at the beginning. It's just one of them was willing to lie. And it turned out to be the most significant lie in human history because it cost us the one thing we do not have, time. And so now we are miles behind the 8 ball. The world's climate scientists gathered together in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have told us a couple of years ago that if we had any hope of meeting the Paris climate targets we set just 6 years ago, that we would have to cut emissions in half by 2030. We haven't done a thing to do it since then. Emissions have kept rising. So now we're down to 7 years and 11 months in order to take on this extraordinary task. It's technologically possible, but we'll see if it's possible politically and economically to force it to happen. The early signs are not so good. You watch from close up in Northern Virginia what happens in our nation's capital. You saw the unhappy spectacle of the Build Back Better bill, which would have been the first serious climate legislation that Congress had ever passed. Founder on the fact that Senator Manchin from your next door state of West Virginia refused to vote for it. And why did he refuse to vote for it? Because he's taken more money from the fossil fuel industry than any other person in Washington, which, trust me, is not an easy contest to win, but he won it. And they got their money's worth. The return on investment for a few $100,000 in campaign contributions is hundreds of billions of dollars in profit, subsidy. So we have to continue to figure out how to stand up to these guys. We're getting closer. They are, in the biblical phrase, I think, the powers and the principalities of our time, the fossil fuel industry. And we're getting better at standing up to them. We've made some real inroads. Some of you were there when we worked on this fight against the Keystone Pipeline. It became the first defeat that big oil had suffered in an infrastructure battle. And it led to so many other fights, so many other, say, pipeline fights against, many of them waged there in Virginia with Dominion on the other side. But everything gets fought now, every coal port, every frack well. We don't win every fight, but we're getting better at it. And we're getting better at it in part because we've learned some new tricks. In the last 10 years, some of us have built this vast fossil fuel divestment movement. It's become the largest campaign of its kind in history. We took our cue from the divestment movement around South Africa. Desmond Tutu, who we lost at the end of 2021, was the first person we called. And he said, yes, please take this tool that we pioneered to end apartheid and use it against climate change because it is the human rights issue of our time. And we've done so. We've got about $40 trillion in endowments and portfolios that have sold off their shares, and it's making a huge difference. Shell Oil said in its annual report a couple of years ago that it had become a material risk to its business, which is good news since Shell Oil's business is a material risk to life on planet Earth. But now we need to go further still. Since action in Washington seems so difficult to come by, we got to look for the other lever big enough to pull, the one marked not politics, but money. And we got to pull it even harder than we have so far. The divestment campaign is expanding out into a different ring that we need you all working on. I've been working with friends to start this new organization called Third Act. If there's anybody else there on this call who's over 60 the way I am, I hope you'll join in with us. Because one of our first projects is going to be to take on the banks that are lending trillions of dollars to the fossil fuel industry, providing it a key lifeline. The four big American banks, Chase, Bank of America, Citi, and Wells Fargo, have lent more than $1 trillion to the fossil fuel industry since the Paris Climate Accords. They did not need Donald Trump to sabotage those accords. They were happy to do it themselves. And this especially if you're an old guy, those of us in the baby boom and the silent generation have 70% of the country's financial assets. That's whose money's in those bank vaults. And it's now being used to make life impossible for our kids and our grandkids. So we'll be launching in a week or so this big pledge to get people to promise to withdraw their money and cut up their credit cards from those banks unless in a year they cease their lending to climate destructive projects. And we hope that you'll join in, and we hope that you will look around your congregations and see where their bank accounts are kept and see who supplies the credit cards that help the administrators do their jobs and so on and so forth. It's not an absolutely simple task. It may take a day sitting at the kitchen table going over your finances, but compared to what other people around the world are doing to deal with climate change, let me tell you, it does not equate to having to pick up your whole family and move from the small peasant farm on the edge of the ocean where your family has spent the last 20 generations, but now they can't because the ocean's rising and the salt is poisoning your fields. It doesn't compare with having to figure out how to move your family out of the desert as it expands in vast parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The UN High Commission on Refugees estimates that we may see 1 billion climate refugees before the century is out. I mean, we saw what 1 million refugees coming into Europe did to discombobulate the politics of that place and turn it ugly. We have seen what 1 million refugees on our southern border does to make our politics ugly and sad. Multiply that by 1,000 for 1 billion refugees, and then see what kind of world we live in. We cannot let that happen. We cannot let that happen. We've got to do everything we can. So I hope that you all will figure out ways to join us in as many of these efforts as you know how. We need people. I guess the thing I'll finish by saying is, we were given a very beautiful planet. On the first page of the good book, which I have the sense that it may be one of those books where a fair number more people read the first page than the subsequent pages, but that's okay, because on the very first page, it's laid out. God has built us this beautiful planet, and he keeps saying everything in it's good, very good, very good. All these animals, all these things that creep around and fly around and swim around, even human beings, it's all very good. And our job is to take care of it, to steward it, to have dominion over it. And we're doing a terrible job. We're driving species out of existence at a rapid rate. We're raising the temperature. We're melting the ice caps. We're running Genesis in reverse, basically. We're decreating the planet around us. The planet is way outside its comfort zone, so we need to be outside ours. And that's going to mean different things for different people. I tell you, I've ended up in jail a hell of a lot more than I ever anticipated I might have back in my Sunday school days. Not everybody has to go to jail, but everybody has to figure out how to do more than they're doing now, to push this harder so that we have some chance of catching up with the physics of climate change, so that we have some chance of dealing with the incredible sadness of the millions of people now who die each year as a result of fossil fuel. I'm so grateful to everybody on this call. And I'll just say, I think that as people of faith, we're in a certain sense quite lucky, because in the middle of the great despair that rationally and correctly troubles all of us, or should, we're able to say, maybe, that if we do everything we can, perhaps there is some force at work in the world that will meet us halfway. That is not the same thing as saying God will take care of this. And so that's not how this works. Clearly, it's not how it works, because the ice caps are melting. If we do everything that we can, then we have some right to hope for something. And I do. And I know that you do. And it's a great pleasure to get to be shoulder to shoulder with you. And I look forward to doing it in person once this pandemic is over, and once we're able to be out where we belong, taking on the powers and the principalities around us. Thank you all very, very much.
Bill, thank you so much for those sobering remarks. And I want to start off the Q&A portion of this. By the way, everybody, I totally forgot to say, please put your questions into the chat for Bill, and we will capture them and hopefully have time to ask them. So I want to start off with it. I'm a former local elected official from Loudoun County, Virginia, which is one of the Northern Virginia counties where we work. And I know that you wrote a book about local organizing, and that's what FACTS does. We are focused on local solutions. And I wondered if you had any thoughts for this group about the importance of local organizing.
Sure. I mean, you guys know how to do better than I the things that are really local to the place you are. The caution I'll make is that important as those things are, unless they're coalescing as part of a national and a global fight, we're not going to do enough to catch up to the physics of climate change. That's why I was talking about how fast we have to move. This is really the first time test we've ever gotten. So look for things that feed into this larger fight. Like, for instance, do not go and change your bank right now. They won't even notice. Join together with others in a movement large enough that they will notice. Join this pledge that will be at Third Act in the course of a few weeks. And we're going to spend the year signing up tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. And we're also going to be asking people to pressure their local governments. I don't know where Loudoun County does its banking, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was one of those big four banks. I don't know where your alma mater, whatever it is, does its banking or gets its credit cards, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was one of those big four banks. I don't know where your denomination, whatever it is, keeps its cash or so on, but I bet you can find some levers to pull. And then we will come together and pull them at once. The idea here is not to perfect yourself or your local community, because, I mean, that's a really good thing to be doing. I'm super happy my house is covered with solar panels, but I do not try to fool myself that that's how we're going to do this. You can't make the math square anymore. One Tesla at a time, one vegan dinner at a time, or even one town or church at a time. We need to be doing it on as big a scale as possible. And along with those local efforts, figuring out how to make them not just additive, but multiplicative, whatever that word is, because that's the kind of pace at which we need to go. So if you're looking for some of those opportunities, take whatever you're doing in your local community or in your house and join it together with the work of places like 350.org or Third Act or wherever. And I have a feeling that that some of this work will be really interesting to be doing through this Third Act group for older people, if there are any other older people here, just because it's a it's an interesting demographic. People say that we become more conservative as we age, and there is some evidence of that, but we can't let that happen here, and I don't think we need to. This generation of older people, those of us in the baby boom or the silent generation, in our first act, were around for very interesting and profound social, political, cultural change. In environmental terms, we're the people of the first Earth Day in 1970. And we saw the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act passed. And I think maybe we assumed that we were solving our problems and didn't quite understand that there were some other ones coming along that were going to bite us. But in truth, taken as a whole, our generations maybe spent a little more of their second act focused on consumerism than on citizenship, maybe. But now people are emerging into this third act with resources, with skills, with time, with kids and grandkids, and really ready to throw down, which, is a good thing. So go to thirdact.org if you find yourself, or if you want to send your parents, your grandparents there. And that'll be one place to kind of aggregate, but you can find other places too to aggregate our efforts. It's that aggregation that's so important because time is so short.
Okay. All right. Well, we have a few more questions from the audience. Susan Bonney, who is the chair of the Sierra Club Great Falls Church group, sorry, not church, Sierra Club Great Falls group in Fairfax County, asked, what industry could have an impact and take a stand for carbon neutral solutions? Data centers, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, Meta?
So these are a very good question. And it's possible for all these, and there's some of the big tech companies and others that are now, some of them are doing real things, And some of them are making sort of greenwashing promises about what they're going to do in 2050 and how they're going to do something called net zero that no one really knows what it is, and on and on and on. I'm afraid, truthfully, that most of them are not yet living up to their billing. Every single one of those companies, even the ones that you named that are doing some good things on their own, they all came together to oppose that Build Back Better bill, which has $500 billion in climate funding in it, because it would raise the corporate tax rate a point or two. Don't get me started on how they expect to make a fortune on a destroyed planet. I don't think I think they're involved in just as short-term thinking as our political class is. But that's what the reality of the moment is. And so we need to push these guys, all of them, to be, I often say when I speak to the VPs of these big companies, stuff, I'm glad that you're, working on the, turning your fleet of delivery vehicles to electric power and stuff. That really helps. But what we really need is your fleet of lobbyists working in the right direction, because then we start getting something done. And so we're going to have to put pressure on these guys. As someone noted in the chat, there's lots of ways to do it. Your Amazon card, for instance, your Amazon credit card, if you've got one, that comes from Chase Bank. So there's a good pressure point to start, and was one that we'll be going after and exploiting. All these things are really powerful.
Okay, so David Yaffe from Arlington, Virginia asked, what do you say about the growth in combustion energy in countries like China, Indonesia, India, et cetera, to get energy for raising standards of living in their countries?
Well, so China's definitely gone through this over the last 20 years, vast increase in coal-fired power. And they're now trying, at least in part, to rein it in. They're installing renewable energy faster than any place on Earth. They're continuing to use a lot of coal-fired power too, because that's how they run their country. Several things to think about. One, in per capita terms, remain far bigger carbon emitters even than the Chinese. And since carbon lasts in the atmosphere for much more than 100 years, the plurality of carbon that's in the atmosphere comes from the 4% of us who are Americans, far more. The Chinese will never pass us. That doesn't mean that we let them off easy. It means that we try, as John Kerry has been trying to do as our climate envoy, to get them on board with moving faster than they're moving away from these fuels. But there's not a snowball's chance in heck of doing that if we're not willing to do anything in our own country. Look, poor Joe Biden, when it was supposed to go over to Glasgow with the Build Back Better bill in his back pocket and slap it down on the table and say, China, how do you like them apples? But thanks to Joe Manchin and the fossil fuel industry, he showed up in Glasgow naked. He had nothing. And everybody knew it. And how was he going to negotiate? What was he going to do? The good news for countries like India and Indonesia is they're going to go through their rapid growth in industrial, their rapid growth in standard of living and things in an era when renewable energy is cheaper than fossil energy. And so it would be it's possible that these will be the first countries that skip at least some of that fossil fuel curve. And we need to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. India in particular is about 15 years behind where China was in terms of its energy development. So it becomes a crucial test case.
Okay, so next we have a question from Scott Peterson from Vienna, Virginia. He's also the vice chair of our board. We've marched, we've written letters, we've talked with elected officials, we've petitioned, organized, we're adjusting our lives, and we continue to organize. My daughter told me today that perhaps humor has a role, like in the movie Don't Look Up. I find it hard to be humorous about climate change as a tactic. What do you think?
Well, first of all, Humor may have a role, if nothing else, in keeping us sane, which is useful in this fight. Second thing is, Don't Look Up really was, I thought, terrific. If you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. It's on Netflix. And among other things, it really captures the way that the media has too often fallen down on this question, especially the broadcast media. And it's a very useful allegory for thinking about where we are. I think that arts in general are an important part of this here. Look, the environmental movement's done a good job of appealing to whichever half of the human brain it is. I can never remember the half that likes bar graphs and pie charts, the rational part. It's an important part. You got to win the argument. But the other half's important too, the visceral part. That's, that's the province of artists and also of theologians and of ministers and of all of us when we find ourselves at the synagogue or the mosque or the church. So all parts of our personalities have to be brought into play here, I think. One of the things we're trying to do very hard at Third Act is work a lot with music, because fight me if you want to, but our generation had the best music of all time. And a lot of those people are still around and joining in this battle with us. And it's really fun to see.
I'm with you on the music. I agree. Okay, so Reverend Dr. Jean Wright from Fairfax County or Fairfax, Virginia asked, I recently read about a study positing that 3.5% of a population of a movement is enough to shift the culture. What is your estimate of environmental group numbers, including all supporters? Might we have close to 30 million involved? And what do you think about this finding about a 3.5% number?
So it's from a wonderful woman named Erica Chenoweth, a scholar at Harvard. And I know her and read her and talk to her and really like her work. In this case, I mean, the problem again here is time. Look, there's no question that 30 years from now, we're going to run the planet on sun and wind. We'll win this fight. The question is, can we do it much quicker than that? Because if we wait 30 or 40 years, the world we run on sun and wind will be a broken world. So we have to figure out how to get enough people, and it's going to be more, I think, than 3%, in order to help us move at the pace we have to go. I don't think there's really a magic number, but I think the answer always is more is better. More people doing more things helps get us where we need to go. And I will say, there are reasons to be, for those of us who've been doing this a long time, like you, Andrea, there's reasons to be proud of the work we've done. We've clearly, over the last decade, shifted the zeitgeist. We're now at the point, there was a new poll today that showed only 10% of Americans didn't believe in climate change, which is a huge change from where we were even a few years ago. Part of that's the good educational efforts of Mother Nature. And part of it is the fact that we keep building these movements to make it easier for people to imagine a different kind of future. We're someplace near a tipping point. That's clear. The price of renewable energy has crossed lines with the price of coal and oil and gas. And the demand for action, really at this point, what the fossil fuel industry depends on is political gamesmanship. They've got 50 Republican senators and they've got Joe Manchin. And by that slim margin, they've been able to hold off yet again serious action on the climate. But that's a lot better than we were 10 years ago. The last time climate legislation came before the Senate, they didn't even bother to bring it to the floor of the Senate for a vote because they knew how badly it was going to lose. That was back in the cap and trade days. So I'm fresh out of predictions about exactly when we're going to get done what needs doing. And I am continually filled with anger and sadness about the ongoing opposition. And the next round of battles is against the incredible greenwashing of the fossil fuel industry. Having denied climate change for 30 years, they're now determined to play pretend for 30 years about their efforts. And it's going to be hard to deal with that because they'll spend $1 zillion running ads left, right, and center. But we got to try. And there are enough of us now doing it that we're making progress. Enough progress? No. Some progress? Yes. Join, push.
So, in 2008, I did a press conference with Senator John Warner from Virginia, who was a very, a leading Republican in our country and so well respected. So I still hold hope in my heart that we're going to get through to conservatives. And we have a question about that from Stuart Schwartz from the Coalition for Smarter Growth. He asks, what have been the most successful messages and arguments you have found with conservatives?
Well, depends. I mean, look, let's begin by being honest. The Republican Party's basically become a wholly owned subsidiary of the fossil fuel industry on these issues. And it's embarrassing to watch, and a huge change from 50 years ago when Republicans were often the best environmentalists, or at least some of the time. And it's not going to be easy to overcome and so on. But if you're talking about people who aren't party hacks and are conservatives, arguments that might work are, one, if you care about national security, the Pentagon is very, very alarmed about climate change. There are routinely admirals and generals describing it as the greatest challenge that we face and the most destabilizing force on the planet. If there are people who are economically oriented, getting them to understand the price tag that we face from unabated climate change is worth doing. The latest estimates are that unchecked global warming will exact an economic toll by the end of the century of $550 trillion, which is more money than currently exists on planet Earth. If there are people in Virginia, say, who live near the coast and value it, the simple fact that the sea is rising and hence insurance companies are beginning to pay attention and things may be enough to rally. And if they are people of faith, then one has to hope that the messages of at least some of our denominations will get through. I think that the most dramatic climate leader in the world may be Pope Francis, and his encyclical Laudato Si, the most thoroughgoing critique of modernity, published this millennium, a fascinating and important document, and that's now leaching its way down through the vast body that is the Roman Catholic Church and beginning to make real change. So there are places that one can chinks that one can try to exploit. But I would just say that the biggest task is not to take the 20 or 30% of people left who are climate deniers or not in the, don't really care about it or whatever. The real task is to take the 70% of people who do understand that there's a problem and get them activated. So I spend less time arguing with, I tell, since I work a lot with students, I'll say to them, do not destroy Thanksgiving dinner arguing with your crazy uncle about climate change, because it's not going to work. But maybe do sit next to your sweet aunt, who probably really is worried about her grandkids, and see if maybe you can move her into a little more action than she's ready for now.
I love that thought. Well, we've come to the end of our time together. I'm so grateful to you for spending this time with us, and I hope we trend older. So I hope a lot of people will continue in third act.
Amen.
And we're really grateful.
And what a pleasure to get to be with you all, and just to say God bless, and we will see you down the road.
And thanks for everything you've done for all of us. Bye-bye. All right. Well, I am going to go very quickly into the next piece. And Steve, I want you to take your full 10 minutes. Okay. So the next speaker is Steve Waltz. He is going to be speaking about the region's climate goals. He's the former head of environment programs at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and he's also a member of our Alexandria Hub. So, Steve.
Thank you very much, Andrea. You used the term sobering in listening to Mr. McKibben, and that's what I had written down as I was listening to him also. Although in the chat, there was some talk about, is it individual action? Is it trying to get the large systems to move? And I think it's really both. And so as part of individual action, and I think part of what Bill talked about is that we need to have our local governments take action and push them along. And so with that, and to help you guys think about the types of things that you can be doing when we get out of the breakout sessions, Andrea asked me to talk a little bit about what's happening in the region and then give some points that you may want to consider as we're doing the work. In our region, we do the Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emission analysis that each locality has, or the major cities and counties have. And then for the whole metropolitan Washington region as a whole, you can see we've made some reductions since 2005 here through 2018. The 2020 data is still coming in. It's primarily because we've cleaned up the grid some, but we really need to do a lot more. We also, it shows us that per capita emissions have decreased, but we still have a long, long way to go. It also shows us that 90% of the emissions in our region comes from the residential and commercial buildings and from transportation. So we really need to focus our efforts there. If you look at the next slide, you can again see just really quickly here how we've kind of stalled, and we have a long way to go to get to even the moderate 80% reduction by 2050 goal that has been set for the region. So next slide really talks a little bit. I'm going to go quick through these because we've got a lot to cover here. But what has caused the reduction to go down over time, and what has caused it to go up? We have growing population. We have more commercial space being built, and that's causing more emissions. As I said, our electricity system is cleaning up, and we've had a lot of other small decreases that have added up. And so we can look at and we can do the analysis, and we can work on whatever side of the brain Bill was talking about here with our charts and things to show us what it is. But again, it shows that we have a lot of work to do. We've got some of the easy work done in the electricity fuel mix cleanup, and we've got good plans to green the grid as we go along. But we really have a lot to do with transportation and buildings that don't show up on this chart. We also, as the next slide shows, have a lot of risks that we're facing. And this is one of the arguments that I think we need to bring, or points we need to bring forward to our elected officials and others, that and Bill talked about the storms and the fires and things. Well, in our region, we are facing these risks. We are seeing them. Bill talked about the people in New York that drowned in the heavy rainstorm. We had a person drowned up in Rockville, Maryland in a heavy rainstorm this fall. And so it really is much closer to us than we sometimes think about it. When we do our analysis of what the real big risks are, extreme heat days, flash flooding, and then are the biggest ones, coastal flooding, extreme winter conditions like we've seen. Drought is actually one we don't really think about, but about 70% of the water we drink in the metropolitan Washington region comes out of the Potomac River. So as the river, if it were to have a long stretch with no rain upstream from us, we could be having drought conditions with our water. And we need to be able to let our elected officials know this is real. These are real risks. Another issue on the next slide, there's a lot of information here, and I won't really have to go over it closely, but we really have to think about who are the least among us that are being hurt the most. One of the ways to look at it is to say, how much of our budgets and our families are we spending on energy? In Virginia, it's about 7 or 8 times more of the people's budgets in the low end of the medium income breakout, those at 0 to 30% of the median family income in the region, they're spending 17% of their household budget on it annually on energy. Whereas those of us who are more comfortable and are at 100% or more of the median family income in Virginia are spending 2%, and in most of Northern Virginia are only spending 1% of our energy. In Fairfax County, the lowest income groups spend 10 times more of their income on energy than those of us that are better off. So we can't forget about this. And as we're thinking about things that we want to push our elected officials to do, we need to include equity very, very strongly as one of the efforts. Now, the next slide, we get into, again, a lot of the calculations about, well, can we get to this 50% goal by 2030? And as Bill said, yeah, the engineers and the scientists have done a good job, and we can get there. And we've modeled at the government level as to how we can get there. We don't have to go into a lot of this here. A lot of it is going to be from the renewable portfolio standards, but we got to have transportation and other measures. But we can do it, but we have to do it, and time is of the essence, as Bill was saying. But the modeling is done behind it. So if some people start to question, really, can we do it? Is the technology there? Is it there? You can say, yes, it is. And you can point to some of the work. Now, at the local level, the types of things in the next slide that we can do are we can push to make sure we have cleaner electricity, things like accelerate development of community solar, community choice aggregation at our local levels, accelerate the deployment of microgrids for critical infrastructure, push for zero energy buildings. And there's a lot of things that can be done on that. Go and the next time you're looking to buy a vehicle, think about a zero operating emissions vehicle, an EV, and again, looking at equity. So as you're thinking about things that you can be helping with and that you can be having our local governments try and push for, these are some of the actions that are available now for us to do. It's just a question of getting the will. The next slide talks about the local plans that are out there. And so we've done a good job in a lot of our local governments of setting plans and setting goals, but now is the time that we really need to be making the investment at the local level and pushing our local elected officials to make the investments to do the activities that are going to be needed to meet these goals. This shows goals for Alexander, Arlington, Fairfax, and Loudoun County. The next slide shows Prince William County, and then some of our neighbors in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and Washington, D.C. We really have some good examples in D.C. with activities that they're doing. We can't always do all of them in Virginia because our local governments don't have the authority to do them, and that means pushing Richmond to give them the authority. But again, we're moving in the right direction. We also, Bill mentioned that we really need to work with others too. And there are federal, state, and regional goals and actions that will help us move there that we need to be able to push for, to go farther than they are doing now, and then do work at the local level in concert with these. The Virginia Clean Economy Act was a very, very good approach to take a lot of the actions that are needed, particularly in the electricity sector. It's going to be a challenge with the changes in Richmond and the General Assembly starting yesterday down there, including some of the people that have been brought forward to lead the environmental parts of state government. So we're going to have to really fight hard. There's also the Virginia Coastal Resiliency Master Planning Framework that is a really good job to look at the flooding along the shoreline where a lot of these in the Northern Neck area conservatives live. And so we need to be able to fight for these things to keep them going, along with the local work that we need to be pushing for. There's also, making sure Virginia does continue to be a California car state and other things like that. The next slide, again, gets to, I think, what Bill was talking about, and maybe can say it much better than I can, that we need to act now. One of the things that I think for some of the more conservative people in our societies are that if we don't do something, it's going to cost us a lot. So as we have increased greenhouse gas emissions, we got increased cost, which is housing affordability. It increases the health risks. We're going to see the health vectors coming into our region that we haven't had before. We've talked about storms, higher day temperatures, but really higher nighttime temperatures is a really critical thing. We need to talk about the damage to infrastructure that we will all have to pay for. I mentioned drought risk. We will have more wildfires, and we have seen smoke in the air here in our area from fires not only out west, but up in Canada and elsewhere. And so we will have worse air pollution. And this all costs us money that we really need to be able to understand that when we think about first costs, there's always a lot of costs of inaction. The head of the Office of Disaster Risk Reduction at the federal level said it really better than I could when she said, "It's baffling that we willingly and knowingly continue to sow the seeds of our own destruction, despite the science and evidence that we are turning our only home into an uninhabitable hell for millions of people." I think that that could have been a quote that we could have heard from Bill today. But I think it is there, and it's something that really drives us to show that we really need to do what and push things to happen quickly, do everything we can in our own lives, and push the larger actions to be done at the governmental level also. So thank you for your time. I hope this gives you a sense of what the kind of plans and beginning actions that are being taken by our elected officials, and maybe seed a couple of ideas as to what you think we ought to be pushing for. Andrea, I'm going to turn it back to you now and let you, I think, move on to the next stage of our night.
Yes, thank you so much, Steve, for sharing all of that excellent information. So folks, we are now going to take a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, we're going to have a wonderful speaker for a local pastor to inspire us. And then we're going to talk about how we're going to work together in various ways. So please come back in 5 minutes. We'll see you at 8:34. Welcome back, everyone. Our next speaker is Pastor Delaney Washington from Oakland Baptist Church in Thoroughfare, Virginia. And that is in Prince William County in the Rural Crescent. Thank you so much for joining us, Pastor Delaney.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here today. Really, it's a blessing for me to be here today, for sure. So, I just want to share just a few things with you, is all. I'm from a small church in a small town called Thoroughfare, and it was a town that was founded by Native Americans and freed slaves, and also people who had been enslaved before that. It's a lot of things have been passed down to me from those people. You see the pictures that we have here. The picture of the gentleman to the left is my great-great-grandfather. His wife is next to him, my great-great-grandmother. His name is Frank Fletcher. Her name is Mary. And then the next person next to her, third picture over, is my great-grandmother. Her name was Mary Susan Allen. And then the picture next to her is my grandmother. Okay, if you look at the picture down below, the gentleman, he's actually my great-grandfather. And I wanted these pictures up here for a reason. These are the people who inspired me. My grandmother in particular, I didn't know my great-great-grandfather and my great-grandfathers, but my grandmother was a big inspiration for me. I learned a lot about my family history through them and how they had to endure and the things they went through. And, it's my great-great-grandfather was born free, but his wife was not. His wife was enslaved, and so he managed to purchase her freedom. And then, of course, then they had children after that. But the one thing that was so important to them, and it's still important to me, is that they were blessed to have land. And that was a big thing for them, was to have land and to take care of the land and protect the land and to be able to pass that land down to generations after that also too. We're in a very small place, we're right outside of Haymarket. And when I grew up, it was a lot of dirt roads and farmers and people renewing the land and taking care of it. But what we've seen lately is a lot of development. And what I've watched are, if there's a place, I always say that if there's a place that's a tree, somebody's trying to cut it down. And you know, when I grew up, I grew up across a cow field, and I could run across a cow field and go see my grandmother, and go see my aunts, my uncles, and cousins and everything. But all that is kind of gone now, and we've seen so much development now that the land is actually starting to disappear. In fact, we've even recently had an issue where one of the places that was one of the pieces of property that was bought actually had one of our graves desecrated. They actually pretty much bulldozed over top the grave, and all the fieldstone and everything that was marking the graves was all taken away. So we're in a big fight for that right now. But my ancestry is African American, but it's also Native American too. We have a lot of that on our side. And so as Native Americans, the land has always been precious to us. In fact, we believe that we are a part of the land. And so it's important for us to make sure that we take care of what God has given to us, just like in Genesis, as I heard the gentleman talking about that, I was thinking about the same thing, about how God has given us a responsibility to take care of this land, to replenish it, and to nurture the land. And what we're seeing is that a stripping away of all that. The thing that people thought was precious before, our ancestors, that's all being tossed away now. And my heart says it's because of money. That's what I see anyway. It's money is taken over, and when it comes down to it, unfortunately, people would rather be more concerned about the money than they are about preservation. So I was pleased when Andrea reached out to me. We talked for a little bit, and was bringing up to me about the Faith Alliance, and I'm pleased now to be a part of it, and I hope that I can be more in tune with it in the next few months for sure, because I'm still new to this right now. But I'm pleased just to be a part of it, and I hope that everybody gets, if you get a chance, come out to Thoroughfare. We're a small place, but we have a lot of heart, a lot of love out there, and a lot of concern for what is happening all around us too. And I'll say something else too. I know I was listening to the political thing going on. Quite frankly, where we are, we're having more issues with Democrats than we are with Republicans. I hate to say it like that, but we are. We've talked to certain people, and it seems like we've gotten pushed back as far as development's been concerned. But we're hoping that everybody will just look at things and do things the right way, which is to take care of what God has given to us. Because once it's gone, it's gone. You can't get it back. So we understand that. So we hope everybody else understands the same thing too.
Thank you so much, Pastor Washington. Sorry, I call you Pastor Delaney.
You don't have to call me Pastor. Just Delaney's fine.
Okay, Delaney, thank you so much for being here tonight. And now we're going to quickly move on to hear from Julie Rosenberg, who is a FACTS board member. We're so happy to have her on the board. She's retired from the EPA, and she's a member of Temple Rodef Shalom in Fairfax County. And she's also a member of the Arlington County Hub, where she lives. She's going to hear some inspiration about the history of FACTS and some of our wins from past years.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Let me get my notes up. Wow, these are tough acts to follow. So I'm going to share with you a bit about why I'm excited to be a relatively new member to FACTS and part of the board. And what I see as the role of the emerging Arlington Hub as a way to inspire you all to participate in local advocacy through FACTS as well. Of course, I want to talk about FACTS accomplishments because that's what really drew me to this organization. So as Andrea mentioned, I recently retired from an absolutely fabulous career at the US EPA. And the last 20 years of that, I was leading the state and local climate and energy program. So I was helping local and state governments with their climate policies and programs. And now I get to be a customer of my program, and I get to talk to my professional peeps as a stakeholder, which is really fantastic. And I'm really happy to be a part of FACTS because I still need to be part of solving the climate crisis. And was really attracted to working with facts because it's a way that working through facts helps me achieve my goals, which is getting tangible climate action, supporting energy equity and climate justice, as you know, both Pastor Delaney and Steve Walls both talked about. And one of my priorities is also growing Jewish involvement in facts. As Andrea mentioned, I'm a member of Temple Road of Shalom in Falls Church. And we know, there are a number of us from Road of on this session, and we know there are a lot of Jewish people who care very deeply and are looking for ways to be active with energy and climate solutions. And I think I'm working to try to grow the community of folks who participate with facts. So enough about me. I want to talk to you about just a few of recent facts accomplishments, because a lot of things have happened in the last year through people, individuals, you, me, our friends, our neighbors, who band together and really make a difference, I think, in the way Bill McKibben referenced. So I'm going to talk a lot about the facts work in Fairfax because it's kind of the mothership, but also I'm going to talk about Arlington since it's my home hub. But then after me, leaders of all the hubs are going to talk about their priorities. So bit about facts accomplishments, just a tiny bit about facts accomplishments, is that, one of the things that just really blows me away is that facts started as a small, scrappy, independent group that was driven by passion. It wasn't a spin-off of another group. It was just a handful of folks who are here tonight, who got together in a Unitarian church basement and said, we got to do something. We have a passion. And since then they've just accomplished quite a lot. So I'm going to start on plastic bags. And plastic bags are ubiquitous, and they used to be the default at our grocery stores, but they are so terrible. They're made from fossil fuels. They often end up in our waterways, where over time they turn into microplastics that are eaten by fish and wildlife and sometimes people. And single-use plastic bags are the third most littered item in Virginia waterways. And when they're not there, they're often incinerated. Much of our trash is incinerated, and plastic bags then create toxic air pollution. Only 10% of single-use plastic bags are recycled. So I thought it was interesting today when I was at a Harris Teeter in Arlington. Every single checkout now has a sign saying Harris Teeter loves the environment, and so it's offering paper bags. And at Facts, we're going to take some credit for that, because Facts and other advocates pressed our state and our county and our city leaders through individual meetings and testimony and emails and all the ways that you can advocate to get the legislature to grant local jurisdictions the ability to enact a tax on single-use plastic bags. And then many of our local governments did that. So Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria had resolutions, and effective at the beginning of the year, there's now a 5-cent tax on disposable plastic bags. And the revenue that's raised then goes to environmental cleanups, environmental education, and also providing reusable bag for low-income people. There were also some very important bus wins. I really jumped into facts advocacy when Fairfax and Arlington were making important decisions about near-term bus investments. In Fairfax, the No More Diesel Bus campaign generated letters and over 300 emails to supervisors from Facts climate activists. And then the supervisors demanded that Fairfax County phase out all diesel buses this year and set a goal of running non-carbon emitting transit bus fleet by 2035. So it needs to happen sooner, but it's really an important start. And then similarly, my personal first win in local advocacy was mobilizing members of our Arlington hub and our congregations to reach out to the Arlington County Board, impress them about the urgency of transitioning now from fossil to electric fuel transit buses. And based on advocacy, the board directed the county staff to accelerate the purchase of electric buses and to invest in bus depot electrification infrastructure. So there were a lot of other wins, but really important for all of us to pay attention to are our city and county climate energy plans. And Steve Walls mentioned, he went through a nice synopsis of all the different plans that are in place in all of our jurisdictions. In Fairfax, for many years, Fairfax didn't have any kind of a climate action plan, while the peers neighboring communities did. And so Fax was able to get Fairfax County supervisors to force to get the staff to develop a plan. Half a dozen Fax folks helped as part of developing it. And last fall in September, the supervisors voted to accept the plan. But now we still have a role. We have to watch to see how implementation is designed, and we're likely to call on you to help participate in making sure that implementation actually gets us to energy and climate programs that are going to make a difference. In Arlington, similarly, we're really carefully monitoring how the county plans to implement our community energy plan. In 2019, we were very proud that Arlington was the first in Virginia to announce a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050, with key energy efficiency and renewable markers along the way. But our staff are still working on that implementation plan. So our Fax Arlington Hub members are actively engaging with the county to keep Arlington accountable and find ways to get those goals accelerated even. We've also had some very important wins at the state level. In 2020, sort of the first time Fax did real legislative lobbying in Richmond, they successfully got the Solar Freedom Bill, which encourages the growth of solar energy in Virginia. And last year, really important was getting local green bank legislation passed. And green banks are a vehicle to support investments, community investments in efficiency, renewable, and resiliency projects that often don't get funding from conventional banks. But with these seeding investments, it helps grow the market and create momentum. Green banks are very important, and getting that authorizing legislation was really key. So looking forward to this year, the big statewide priority for Fax is focusing on energy efficiency. And one of Steve's slides showed just how important buildings are to what huge contributors they are to our greenhouse gases. So we're looking at legislation to strengthen efficiency standards for buildings. And we have patrons by way of Senator Boysko and Delegate Corey. And I know a number of you have mentioned in the chat that what's happening with our legislature, with our governor changing. Energy efficiency has been the one climate and energy issue with bipartisan support, and we really hope that continues, and we will really be calling on all of you to help that continue. So speaking of calling on you, Fax has become a very respected and unique part of the climate change advocacy network. And, Fax advocates bring something special to the table that really draws the attention of decision makers. It's the moral dimension of our advocacy. It doesn't matter what your faith background is, the fact that we all believe that driving carbon pollution to zero is a moral imperative. And so we're looking to you to keep the pressure up, to keep organizing. We've got to together hold our elected officials accountable. So, this started in 2014 as a handful of people, and now it's over 3,600 supporters from almost 200 faith communities throughout Northern Virginia. So we're strong, and we have growing hubs in Arlington and Alexandria and Loudoun and Prince William. And, it's super important, and people make a difference. And I really am glad you're here and look forward to getting your feedback in the breakouts. So now I'm going to turn it back to some of our Fax Hub leaders to tell you about what their priorities are.
Yeah, so everyone, we are going into lightning round where we're going to very quickly go over what's coming up in all of the jurisdictions for the coming year. So who are we starting with? I think Fairfax. Take it away.
Sure. Hi, I'm Chris Rosenthal, and I'm new to Fax, but I've lived in Mount Vernon District for over 30 years now. I'm really excited to be part of this. Part of the Fairfax County's priorities are from the Community-Wide Climate and Energy Action Plan, CCAP, and over the summer, people decided to go for the biggest bang, what's going to reduce greenhouse emissions the fastest. So that means transportation, energy efficiency, energy sources, and some other things. Another much needed effort is to advocate for a chief sustainability officer for Fairfax County. We got the 12 staff for the clean energy or the energy and environment department, but there's nobody that can coordinate the efforts across the whole county. So having somebody who can move across departments and has strategic authority would be really important. It's also something that other jurisdictions have, that bond donors like to, or funders like to have. And then there's the Resilient Fairfax Sustainability Plan that we're also helping to look at. Thanks.
Take it away, Bill.
Hi, my name is Bill Pugh. I am a member of Great River Tendai Buddhist Sangha, which is based here in Alexandria, and I coordinate the Alexandria Hub. Right now, the city is putting together an energy and climate action plan, and one of the big priorities is we need to restore funding to that. It's a great effort, but unfortunately the budget was cut early in COVID. And we're also pushing for equitable climate solutions as part of city budget priorities that are being put together right now. These are measures that can help make Alexandria a more affordable place for all families while also cutting emissions. And so there's a lot going on. And if you live in the city of Alexandria or worship here, we hope you'll join us. Thanks.
Great. Hi, I'm Tom O'Reilly. I'm the coordinator for the Arlington County Hub. And this year, as Julie said, we're going to be focusing a lot on the Community Energy Plan implementation roadmap. That's due to come out some point in the spring. We'll see what happens with that. We want to push them to accelerate their timing so that we're not looking at such, we don't have 2050 for a goal. We need to bring that back to 2030 or so. We want to bring Arlington back to be the regional leader in climate action. We seem to have lost our mojo a bit, so we want to push a little bit on that. We want to turn as the budget comes forward, which will be, again, every year, we want the county to have a all of government lens when they look at, all of government should be looking at everything they do through the climate lens. And then both between the equity and implementation of the programs and the projects that come forward, as well as growing our faith communities so that they are activated and taking part in this work. And a smaller one, which is actually really promising, is the plan Langston Boulevard, where we have a real input into how a future of a commercial corridor may look climate-wise. Thanks.
Delaney, Washington, and the Prince William Fax Hub is still growing, still forming, getting going. Some of the big issues in the coming year are going to be the ongoing effort to protect the forests and the wildlife and agricultural lands of the Rural Crescent from more sprawling development far from the jobs which would drive up the greenhouse gas emissions. Also, data centers, which emit a lot of greenhouse gases, and they're just not appropriate anywhere. And building these next to a hallowed historical ground of the Manassas National Battlefields is definitely not okay. And finally, there's an ongoing effort to put an outer beltway for the DC region through Prince William County and up into Loudoun County. This kind of massive highway would induce a lot more sprawling development and traffic and driving up greenhouse gas emissions. And we just need to get Prince William County's attention on these real climate solutions and protect our lands.
Great. And so in Loudoun County, we are just beginning a hub. It's where I live, and I want to welcome everyone who's here from Loudoun, and I hope you'll be in touch with me so we can get going. We're expecting a Board of Supervisors vote on a 5-cent plastic bag tax at the January 18th meeting, and they need our support. The board's restarting their work finally on a countywide energy strategy with next steps expected in April. Also this spring, the second phase of the Silver Line will open, and the final metro station is in Ashburn. And we have a lot of work to do to increase bicycle and pedestrian and transit connectivity to the new stations. We need to keep a constant eye on the efforts to build bigger sprawl-inducing roads, including widening Route 15 and an outer beltway. And then the ever-growing number of data centers, and we need to protect the 200,000 plus acres of rural land in the county.
Hi, everybody. Scott Peterson, FACTS Advocacy Chair. As Steve Walsh said, two of the biggest drivers of greenhouse gas pollution are in transportation and in buildings. You know, Virginia's made some good progress in terms of transportation with the clean car standards, more to come, but leaky buildings, inefficient buildings are really critical. So FACTS is supporting state legislation, as Julie said, to make buildings more efficient. We're supporting several bills right now that are being co-sponsored by or patroned by Delegate Corey and Delegate Sullivan, as well as Senator Boysko. You know, in the last 6 weeks, FACTS activists have met with all Northern Virginia senators. 2 years ago, they didn't really know who FACTS was, but we have gained such respect over a short period of time that we met with all Northern Virginia senators except one, Chap Peterson, who so far has refused to meet with us. So if you are his constituent, keep an eye on Senator Peterson. We'll get to talk to him sooner or later. Last but not least, I do want to mention that we have for the very first time taken a stand on the Governor Youngkin's nomination of Andrew Wheeler as Secretary of Natural Resources. You know, FACTS is a nonpartisan organization. We've invited Democrats and Republicans to our climate crisis forums, but Secretary Wheeler, nominee Wheeler, with his background as EPA administrator under former President Trump, is a danger to everything that we stand for and have worked hard for. And for the very first time, we're opposing Andrew Wheeler's nomination.
All right, thank you, Hub leaders, and we look forward to your leadership over the next year. Okay, so now we are going into breakout rooms, and I wanted to just take a moment to talk to the folks who are leading the breakout rooms. I know we're behind on time, but I will say we also have smaller groups, so hopefully you can actually get through everything, but please use your judgment. All right, folks, so we are going to be placing you in rooms with people from around the region and the state, and it's facilitated by a group of wonderful volunteers. We also have a note taker assigned to each room so we can capture the information you share with each other. This is an opportunity to hear from all of you about your priorities and your passions, and it will be invaluable information as we plan our work going forward. Then after the breakout session, we'll come back to the main room and we'll do a quick action together. And let's come back at 9:26. And I think we'll have enough time to do everything in the 4 minutes. All right, so we have had a big change in our state. We have a new governor coming in. I understand he's being sworn in on Friday. So right now he's still Governor-elect Youngkin. And we have 69 people on this call still, on this Zoom. And if all of us wrote a personal letter to him or an email to him that comes from your heart, that tells you why you're concerned about climate change, ask them to make it a priority, that could include your favorite climate solutions. Like for me, it'd be biking and walking infrastructure, and offer our help and support. I think we could really make a difference and get his attention. And he's definitely giving signals that he's going the wrong direction. And, you know, let's at the very beginning make a difference. So these are the contact information that he has on his transition site. So you can copy down the address and maybe write. They say that written letters actually really matter for elected officials and get their attention, or you can write them at info@youngkimforgovernor.com. By Friday, we might have different contact info, but this is what we have for now. So we don't have time to take this action right now, but I'm really hoping that all of you will take that to heart and really do it, because I think we would make a big difference. Okay, and then the other thing we wanted to do, we have a poll. Riley, if you can put that up. We know that many of you would like more training on how to be a great advocate. And we would like to do that if we can with our capacity. So, and we want to hear from you what your priorities would be. So if you can just pick what are the most important ones to you, that would be really helpful. And Riley, do people just click on it? Or I'm just
Yep, I'm getting the results are populating for me, and as soon as we end the poll, everyone will see the results.
I see. So I'm just seeing the results. Okay, that makes sense. And by the way, be sure to put things in the chat that we skipped here that you think we need to do. All right, so learning how to lobby elected officials or talk, we meant to change that to really talking and building a relationship with our elected officials. All right, this is great. Okay, and I just wanted to say, as people are finishing their votes, if you didn't have a chance to answer the questions in the breakout sessions, we really would love to hear what you have to say. And so please send us an email, and you can send it to info@faithforclimate.org, and we will add that to our notes and analysis and outcomes from this session. So looks like how to build our relationships with elected officials is definitely the winner. And good news on testifying, we actually have a webinar that we can do we've done it in partnership with ANS with Renee, and we'd be happy to do that in different jurisdictions. And I've written many, many letters to the editor, and that would be a fun one to do. Okay, so with that, I want to say, first of all, thank you to everyone for hanging in there. And I'd like to invite Pastor Delaney, to come back and take us out with a prayer.
Sure, my pleasure. Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity that you have given to all of us to come together with a common purpose in mind. Lord, we lay our hearts and our attitudes before you, Father, asking you, Lord, to bless these initiatives, Lord, that we're seeking, and Lord, that you will give us the guidance and the direction that we need in order to make these moves effective. And then, Lord, that you would also touch the hearts of the officials or anyone else, Lord, who may be in a position of being able to help to enact certain things, Lord, to protect your world, Father God, the world that you gave to us, the world that you call upon us to protect and to preserve. So, Father, I thank you once again for this, and I pray, Lord, that everyone on here, Lord, will have a restful and a peaceful sleep tonight, Lord, that everyone will have a blessed time, a blessed week, Lord, and looking forward to the opportunity for all of us to meet again. Thank you for everything. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for being with us tonight. And we look forward to the year to come with you. Be well, be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.